a lot of brand strategy advice is usually things like do this, focus on differentiation, do Y, look at liquid death. But in reality, brands have many life stages and need to focus on different aspects in each of those stages. And that's exactly what I'm diving into today with James Hurman. It's a very interesting episode. So,
Buckle up and let's talk branding.
Hey, Steph, I'm real good.
cool. Well, James, could you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, my name's James. I'm from New Zealand, and I am formerly a strategic planner in the advertising business. And for the last 10 years, I've been the founding partner at a company called Previously Unavailable here in New Zealand. And we work with a ton of companies, innovative companies, people that are bringing new things into the world, and we help them with everything from brand strategy to brand design to product design, innovation strategy, a ton of other stuff like that. And I'm also someone who has spent 15 years or so really interested in advertising and marketing effectiveness, and I do a lot of work in that space too.
Love that. I've checked out the website and like some really interesting work there on previously unavailable. So definitely we could talk about that a little bit more later down the line. But to start, I sometimes bring back this painful category of definitions. And since you are a writer, I'm sure you're up for it. Like what is a brand for you?
Yeah, I think like at its best, a brand is the kind of a really simple idea that's at the heart of a company, and it informs everything that that company does and every decision that that company makes. Um, and brand is obviously often externalized through things like logos and visual identities and advertising and these sorts of things. Um, but brands are at their best when they're an idea that's really at the heart of a business, and that the externalization of the brand is just reflective of what's truly going on kind of inside the company, or what the company's genuine sort of point of view on the world is, their genuine kind of their values and what they're trying to do and the way that they're trying to do it. And so it should be something that's right there, kind of really at the center of an organization, and then brought to life in a way that's kind of engaging and stands out and represents that company at its best.
Mm, interesting. And like just a small side tangent, but I've been thinking about this myself as I'm preparing a like a teaching course at university here, and one of the things that actually came up that was interesting to me was when I'm looking at like what is a brand and like these definitions is that you have these brands that where indeed this idea lives and then it expresses themselves, but you also have a lot of brands that are basically just like conceptually like just invented. Like, Unilever has probably like 20 or 100 brands that aren't really like from
Yeah.
that core. Like, how do you feel about those? And like, have you ever worked with one of those? And like, how do you see a difference in the way of working?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a really good point. So when you're working within like a house of brands, like a massive consumer goods company like the likes of Unilever or Procter and Gamble, then you're using brand in a slightly different way. Like it's not, your organization is governed at sort of a different level, kind of above where all of those brands sit, right? So the brand is probably more what it kind of was at the very sort of beginning of branding, where it's kind of it's a trust mark, right? It's
Mm,
something which is there to build a sense of kind of familiarity with, and trust in the quality of the product and kind of who it's come from, as opposed to the kind of culture of the company itself. So when you're in a sort of mono brand culture, one a company that's built around just one brand, then it's easier to to do what I was talking about before, which is kind of orient the entire business around that idea and that set of values and that direction. Whereas when you're in a big multi-brand organization, that's a little harder to do because teams are usually they're working within a larger organizational structure. So yeah, I think those organizations probably do think about branding in a slightly more not superficial, but it's kind of a
Mm,
it's something to really send a signal to the consumer about the product and its kind of point of view on the world, I guess, as opposed to the whole organization, and that's kind of
mm.
fine too. That's fine too. I sort of for me, it's more meaningful in those more those companies that are centered around one brand.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think it's actually interesting what the point that you bring up about like it might be actually the case because I've worked for both types of companies and like I do feel that sometimes it is harder when it's like not breathing in the whole organization in a way that it does sometimes with these more one-to-one where the brand is the story and the story is how you tell it and there's no complexity there. So I think in a way it's like almost a like let's say a caution point about brand architecture and how you set up those things if you still are able to, of course, like not all companies do that. And looking at your webs like I mean the website, I do see like the type of companies you're working with a lot are typically more of these I guess smaller brands, or am I mistaken?
No, not at all. I mean, one of our areas of specialty is is in working with startup, very early stage companies, and sometimes they're right at the beginning of their journey, so they haven't even created their product yet. They're literally just an idea, and we're helping that idea kind of develop and eventually come to life. And sometimes they're at more of a scale up stage, so they're still an earlier stage business, but they've been in market a few years, and they need to understand how their brand can help them sort of go to that next level of scale.
Mm,
But in both of those cases, they are still early stage companies that do tend to be smaller in terms of number of people in the companies and revenue and those sorts of things. We also work with the biggest, the biggest of the big companies with their, usually with their sort of product and innovation teams, which is a sort of slightly different discipline. But yes, one of our sort of key areas is those smaller organizations.
mm. Yeah, and like I think I also noticed that in some of the case studies that you were describing in the book, like there's some really cool like interesting brands like the one I think it's non-alcoholic beverages like
Yeah.
AF it's called,
Hey,
where where it's like these types of brands that they can be very bold because like they have that personality and they can do that. And very often what you actually see is that those types of brands get bought up by the bigger ones because they can't really do that inside of a bigger organization, create that type of brand, which is kind of interesting to me. But like your point about the life stages, that's actually what I would love to like circle this conversation about. I think it could be interesting if we walk through the different stages because that's also something you describe in your book about future demand, which is highly recommended. I'll put it in the show notes. But maybe like let's walk through the different life stages of these brands and like let's start at the beginning. What are the needs there and like how are they different from later stages and how are you working with like really ID to startup to market?
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like if we go right from the very start, so if you're sort of pre-market, you're not, you're developing your product and your company and your brand and you're not even really out in the market yet, or you're at a very, very, very early stage. I tend to think of brand as sort of brand with a small b as opposed to brand with a big B. Um, and what I mean by that is at that stage of a company, everything should be reasonably malleable. And by the way, I'm talking about innovative startup companies as opposed to just small businesses that are in a category that's a mature category, and but when you're an innovator, the very start of your life stage is really it's figuring out what's going to kind of resonate, how to tell your story and talk about things, sort of getting to a point of having some confidence that there's product market fit, and those sorts of things. And so at the start, I think, the brand should sort of be as malleable as the product often is, where you're iterating, you're kind of trying different things out, you're reacting to kind of feedback that's coming back to you, and you're at a product level you're kind of changing and adjusting, and it should be the same with brand at that very very early stage. It's kind of like, okay, have we got, let's have as clear as possible a kind of definition of our mission and what we're setting out to do. But let's be pretty malleable about exactly how that shows up. And that's right at the start. Then when you sort of get kind of, if you get to market, then so starts the sort of journey of slightly more kind of, capital B branding, where it becomes a little bit more important to be a bit less kind of fluid with it all, and start to lay down the things that are going to stick around for a long time. Um, but if you're bringing a new, particularly a innovative new product to market, brand in that early stage tends to be, the point of branded marketing, in large part, is to help people understand what it is that you make, so what you're bringing into the world. And if you're an innovative company, or a unique product, there's often going to be very very little existing understanding of what you do, or what your product is, or what your category is even. And so it really is about sort of bringing clarity to what it is that you do, explaining what your kind of product does in the most simple and kind of normal language, human way possible. And hopefully doing that, in a way that's engaging, and has a bit of personality and all that kind of stuff. But you're really focused on, like, our first job is just to, get that first little audience of ours across what it is that we're actually making. Then as you begin to scale, a couple of things happen. So you become, people are a little bit more aware of you. Maybe they've heard about you and kind of broadly what you do. And sometimes there's some competition that comes into the mix as
Mm.
well. They're doing similar things and all the rest of it. It becomes a little bit less about the what and a little bit more about the how. So, once we've kind of got the world across what it is that we make, especially if there are competitors, it's a little bit more about how we do that, or how we're different, right? And so branding becomes a little bit more about differentiation, about kind of communicating not just that we make this thing, but how we make it in a way that's different or better. And then as you reach maturity, where you've got, a category that's very well understood by consumers, you've got product that everyone knows what it is, you've probably told people how it's different plenty in the past, um, and there's lots and lots of competition that are probably making things where they're very very similar to one another. Then it becomes a little bit more about the why, a little bit more about what that brand's kind of point of view on the world is, that brand's personality, that brand's kind of, yeah, what they stand for, and connecting more on a sort of an emotional basis. Um, and so, I'm sort of massively sort of oversimplifying things by putting it in those terms. And of course, at the start, when we're engaging people with the brand, and what we make, we still want to do, we still want to bring some emotion into that. We still want people to connect with us in an emotional way, not just a purely rational way. And of course, when we're a large organization, we still want to have a really clear link back to the product and what it does and what we're doing, but we want the center of gravity to be a little bit more kind of emotional, because it's not going to be, the product probably isn't going to be what differentiates us.
Mm.
It's going to be less rational than that. So that's how I kind of think about, the role of brand at different stages, and how a brand communicates and what it should sort of focus in on at different stages.
Interesting. Like, I think one of the things that I would love to dive a bit deeper in is the moment where I think, like, I've been a lot at these types of companies where you go from like you have a certain scale, you've reached some kind of product market fit, you feel like you're a bit more mature in the market, but you're still like way off from like being the well-known dominant brand. Like could even be like 2-3% market share. It's a
Yep.
lot for from where you came from, but it's nothing in comparison to where you want to go. There usually like a lot of companies there are still very much in that like rational convincing mindset that they learned early on, like let's talk about our unique product and how we're doing category creation, and you know all the tropes that come with, especially in tech,
Mm,
these types of things. But then switching to that like emotional storytelling, buzzwords, whatever, you know,
mm,
the idea of like trying to get more attention, not based on rational arguments about what you're doing. Like, you have any ideas on internally how to get an organization to shift to that? Because that's really like, I've been trying to help other companies do that as well. And I see that as a big challenge because often this mindset is baked into the
mm.
organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is what the future demand kind of principle and book is really about. That that at, in any market, you've got two types of demand. You've got people that are in the market and ready to buy now, and you've got people who aren't in the market just yet, but are going to come into it at some point later. And we've got two really important jobs to do with those two audiences. And so, what's often in companies' best interest to do right at the start, and when they're at very kind of, low levels of market share, is actually just to try and win the customers that are in the market right now, because there's more of them than their existing customer base. So they can sort of, they can do a lot of the types of marketing, which does tend to be a bit more rational, but less creative, but less emotional, because if you're in the market looking for something, you actually do want the rational information on it. You do want to
Mhm.
know the pros and cons of it. You do want to know how it stacks up to competitors and how much it costs and where I can get it from and all of that rational stuff. If you're in the market looking for the solution to your problem or choosing one product from a category of products, then that information is very useful to you. If you're the other, like if you're not in the category because you just bought from the category last month and you're not going to until 6 months time, or for whatever reason you're not ready to buy right now, but you're going to come into the category later, you're actually not very interested in all the rational information. Like you've got way more important things on your mind than reading through and consuming functional information about a product that you have no interest in buying right now. So that's where the shift kind of to more emotional, creative marketing kind of that's the reason that we do that. We do that to engage an audience that earn attention from an audience that doesn't care about our product category right now because they're not ready to buy, and we're trying to implant kind of positive memories about us. So when they come into the category in 6 months' time or whatever, they remember us and they have good feelings about us, and they gravitate towards us. And so for those companies that are at that point where they've grown to, as you say, sort of 2 or 3% market share, they've probably done that great job of kind of really attracting all the people who are in the market. And the next step for them to grow is to build that future demand. Like talk to those people who are going to come into the category later, because they're going to be the ones who are really going to drive the future growth and drive the path towards higher levels of market share. And if we wait till they come into the market to kind of introduce ourselves, then and another company's kind of introduced themselves beforehand, they're more likely to gravitate towards our competitor. And so there's this kind of that by showing sort of people the maths of okay, you've reached a point where actually you need to talk to a bigger audience and you need to talk to them in a different way. That's, I guess, the argument that I use to help companies understand why they should be targeting more broadly, communicating more emotionally, have a brand and marketing that really stands out and cuts through and engages people that aren't in the market right now. All of those things that we think about as more sort of classic brand building marketing than the
Mm.
sort of sales activation or performance marketing side of things.
There are some like really interesting brands, like I think also on some case studies of what you have done, but like Liquid Death comes to mind as one of those examples where I feel like they kind of got out the gate swinging, like brand building that is then, instead of taking that route. Obviously, probably also linked to the category where like it's
Yeah.
hard to do that. But like, do you feel that it's possible to just like start with that, like that type of brand building mindset from the get-go rather than like take that more
Yeah, I
the
mean, I
other
think
road?
Liquid Death's a really interesting case because I think they've been, I think they are a massive outlier, right? They don't represent what the normal path of a business is, and it's awesome because like go them, it's really cool what
Yeah.
they've done. I think it would be very, very difficult for other founders to try to replicate or to try to learn too much from them. Because I think what they were doing from the outset was being themselves, right? And this
Mm,
is this is actually, going back to that idea at the heart of a company, like when that's really at its most authentic is when the brand reflects what, the personality basically of the founder. And so another good example of that is Patagonia, right? That brand is really an extension of Yvon Chouinard's, like that's his values and his point of view and everything that he's driving for in terms of saving our home planet. So that comes across as very authentic. Now with Liquid Death, really different types of people to the Patagonia founder. They were funny, creative people who were,
mm,
out there, who loved kind of doing things that were really kind of, I don't know if you'd call them outrageous, but like things that just were really counterculture and sort of defiant and rebellious and really funny. That was just that's who they are, right? And so they can do that. They're just expressing themselves in a way that's really, really authentic. I think when brands that aren't innately like that, like their founders aren't innately, rebellious, hilarious, wildly creative kind of people, it's really, really hard to kind of replicate that. So I think they are A, as I say, sort of a massive outlier, and B, they were just doing what any kind of founder should really be doing, which is kind of, how do we make this as authentic an expression of ourselves as we kind of possibly can? And there aren't many who would take as many risks as as comfortably as the Liquid Death team have. Um, and if they did take them, they'd probably get them all wrong, because the Liquid Death team were, highly experienced risk takers. They sort of knew how to do that in a way that really has struck gold for them.
yeah, totally. And I think like it's as you said, like it's not there. We usually do this a lot in marketing worlds, like look at Nike or look at some examples, but like that doesn't mean it would work for everyone. And also like as you said, like it's also a lot about how the founders will well deal with it basically.
I think
Um,
the other thing about Liquid Death is they were making a product in an extremely mature market. There's
mm,
nothing. I mean, we can stretch and say putting water in a can is innovative, but I mean, I don't think it. I mean, I think it's a really nice sort of take on water, but it's by no means as innovative as the companies that sort of we work with. Um, and so they didn't have to go through that stage of explaining to people what water is and what its
yeah.
benefits are, right? And so they had a sort of massive head start. They went into a category and said, how do we kind of massively disrupt this category and just
Mm,
do something that's really, really different? And they did have, I don't know if they still do, but in the early days they did have messaging, which was around it's in a can because you know we don't like plastic, um, and and so they did a bit of that messaging that was sort of wrapped in all the creative things that they did, but they didn't have to do what most innovators need to do, which is actually educate the market first up on what the hell they've made.
Yeah, like I'm wondering. I think it will inevitably lead us a bit to the question that was very like let's say prominent the last weeks on LinkedIn on distinctiveness versus differentiation, because like in your let's say your plotting of the life stages and the role of brand, you talk about going from what to how to why, and
Mm.
the why part, like often it triggers like the Simon Sinek thing and the whole purpose thing, and like is that what we should be focused on, or is that way like has that been overshoot, like it's more
Yeah,
about purpose than it is about differentiation versus distinctiveness actually, but like
yeah.
curious about your take on that.
I think so. I mean, I think that purpose has been sort of massively overdone, sort of obviously, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think also we've conflated purpose in the Simon Sinek, definition with with doing things that are socially or environmentally very good. Um, and when Sinek talked about, in his original presentation, when he talked about Apple, the purpose wasn't an environmental or a social one. It was just it was about, it was about a love of creativity and creative people, and sort of, that was nothing to do with what we've come to view as purpose, which is all about kind of doing something almost sacrificially good in the world. Um, and by the way, I love companies that do things that are sacrificially good in the world. Like, it's awesome. And I think those companies, and again, I just sort of go back to Patagonia as probably the true exemplar of this. When it's authentic, when the whole company is genuinely built around this idea of saving our home planet, then it's great and it works like nothing else. It's perfect. When it's a company that's ultimately not really about that, like their board is not really about that, their executive leadership's not really about that, but marketing would like them to be about that because they think that consumers would be drawn to that, then it kind of all falls over, right? And so purpose, I mean, when I say focus on the why, it's not so much, it's not about kind of purpose in the way that we've come to define it in our industry. Um, it's just going to, not what we make and how we make it, but what's our point of view on the world. And our point of view could be nothing to do with solving the environment or social issues or any of that kind of stuff. It just could be a really clear kind of point of view. And I think, like, if you go to Liquid Death, I think they one of the coolest things I heard about Liquid Death was that the way they define their target audience is that it's anyone with a sense of humor. So that's a really lovely definition of a target audience, and their purpose. I mean, I don't even know if they have a purpose statement or whatever, but you can see that their driving force as people is to kind of entertain the world. Is to kind
Yeah.
of put buzzy things into the world that, let's kind of have fun with calling a product Liquid Death, and saying murder your thirst, and making all of this kind of radical advertising. You can tell that that's where they really get their thrills from. And they've oriented their company around kind of doing that, which is awesome.
Mm.
So I think that's just as valid a kind of a why as Patagonia's.
Yeah. Like when shifting from this idea of harvesting existing demand, like people that are in market, to going towards future demand and trying to reach those audiences, one part we've already talked about is like the messaging and how you present it, how you express yourself. Like that's, I think, an evolution you have to go through as a company. But I think another big aspect here is the channels you use, the money you spend, and where you spend it basically to get to that broader reach. And I think that's also a big hurdle because very often like companies are struggling to find the right channels to get that reach, but also then to prove the ROI on those channels, because it's a totally different mindset than just like, tracking people that typed something in Google, which is very one to one because they're in market and they're giving signals. Any ideas on that? Like, and especially I think what's interesting for the listeners is how modern brands and new channels play a role in that whole brand building space, going from performance marketing or capturing demand.
Yeah, so I think classically we think of performance marketing as being digital, and being highly targeted. So we're going to really kind of get down to a very tight definition of who we're trying to sell to and really tightly target them. Um, and brand building is thought of as using above the line channels and sort of talking to much broader audiences. And we need to be doing both of those things, but they're not necessarily channel specific, right? So
Mm.
you can do performance marketing on linear television if you want to, and companies have been doing it for decades, like direct response TV, which is pretty rational. It's about driving a direct response to the ad. It's price and product and call here to buy now and that sort of stuff. That's performance marketing. That's doing exactly that. And likewise, you can use social media or digital marketing to do brand building. You can target really broadly if you buy just for reach as opposed to, buying a very narrow target. You can go out and reach lots of people, and you can do stuff that is much more emotional, and much more creative if you choose to. So I think um, the sort of defining brand and performance in terms of channels is probably
Mm.
unhelpful. Um, and the art of channel planning, the art of media planning, is about saying where where is if we want to target broad, where is there a broad audience for our brand? And that might be on LinkedIn, it might be on television, it might be on billboards, who knows? It's going to vary by brands and by category and by consumers that we're targeting. And so that's what the whole discipline of sort of media and channel planning is there to do, right? Is to kind of
Mm.
figure out where is that big audience going to be. And so it's difficult to kind of go, use TV or just use or
Do
whatever.
TikTok.
Yeah, it's going to be really different for each. And so, it's the same for performance marketing. Like some performance marketing, TikTok is absolutely the place to be. Other
Mm.
performance marketing, is like direct response TV or radio might be actually a much better bet than TikTok. And so, again, it just comes down to what the sort of variables are of the product and the category and the audience.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's probably the answer is somewhat the same, as in like the same thing goes for often, like we're looking into sidestepping paid advertising, because a lot of these companies scaling, like they don't want to, or they don't have the big budgets. And what you often see, I think, especially with these challenger brands, is that the other route is, let's say, let's get as much like PR or influencers, or let's get people talking about us. And I think it's definitely an interesting route, but it's also like not the easiest route to take. Like, I don't know, working with some of these more bolder brands that I can imagine have gotten PR, like what do you think about this route, and how to look at it?
Yeah. I mean, going back to the budget thing, like if you don't have um, if you don't have the money uh, to spend appropriately on marketing to grow, then chances are you're not going to grow. So it just it comes back to like, I don't know, do you want to invest in growth or not? If you don't, if you're happy to stay where you are, then great. Like just keep sort of doing what you're doing. If you imagine a company that makes $500,000 of revenue, and so their marketing budget might be 50 grand or something like that, and they want to get to a company that is, $100 million in revenue, where their budget's going to be like $10 million or something like that, right? That budget is going to scale up over time, right? and so they're going to need to spend more and more to get there. And so the mindset has to be if we want to drive this top line growth, we need to also sort of commit to this kind of marketing spend growth, because there's no way we can get to be there's no $100 million company that spends 50 grand on marketing. That doesn't exist. So you're going to have to.
That's the problem. I think there's this myth that a lot of companies, well, especially in tech, people believe that they can. You know, the whole idea about Tesla
Yeah.
not advertising, and we know it's not true because they have Elon Musk and they have a PR machine. So, but like that is a big hard myth, actually.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and again, I just say like there are always outliers in marketing, and if we
Mm,
focus too much on them, and yes, like Facebook at the start, not much or no money on kind of advertising. Google at the start, same. Tesla at the start, same. I mean, the question you've got to ask yourself is: are you really creating something that is such a kind of epoch-defining, incredible innovation as Larry and Sergey or Zuckerberg or
mm,
Elon Musk? And I mean, you know, the answer is statistically, the answer is no, you are not. You're creating something that is much, much, much more normal than that, which doesn't have any of the inherent virality of those
mm,
companies. And so if you try to create this, I mean, if you want to market that way, then your job is to create a product that is so extraordinary, not just good, not just better, not just really fucking good, but absolutely fucking so extraordinary that it's capable of growing without that marketing spend. Now, if you can do that, fantastic. Good on you, go and do it. But like, if you're not doing that, don't kid yourself that you are, because it's like, because you're never going to get anywhere. And it's those outliers are like, they're like lottery winners. Like they don't,
mm.
you know we think, because someone wins the lottery every week, someone wins the lottery, so we think it must be really easy to win the lottery. Look, people do it every single week, right? The true reality is it's fucking damn near impossible. And that's the same when we read these kind of stories about these companies that have been meteoric rise and all the rest of it. Like most of them, it's a combination of like, you know, either like either product that's so extraordinary, or it's a combination of kind of timing and luck and a whole bunch of
Mm.
factors that are very hard to control for. And usually what goes up comes down as well, by the way. And so a lot of those companies that are those rocket ship successes, you look 5 years down the track and you find that they're either non-existent or, nowhere near on the same trajectory as they were. So I think it's kind of like it's important for marketers and for founders to sort of understand that there is, if we look at the bulk, like the other 99.99999% of companies that aren't those ones that we've been talking about, right? There are some general rules. And one of those rules is if you want to grow, you need to spend at a competitive level to do that. And
Hmm.
yes, you can enhance the value of that spending by doing things that are really clever, really creative, kind of really go viral or kind of generate lots of PR attention. And yes, you absolutely should be doing those things, but but they need to be underpinned with a realistic and competitive level of spend.
James, thank you so much for this. This was super interesting.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Steph.
All right, that was it for my conversation with James Hurman. As always, if you really like the show, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I hope to see you in the next show. Take care.